So, in this section, we will talk about the causes, consequences, and policies for addressing this income and wealth inequality that we have been talking about so far. So, economists have really researched a lot about economic inequality, and they have come up with several reasons as to why, what causes such inequality to first arise and then persist for so long. And one of the reasons for increase in income inequality that economists attribute is to the changing demographics, especially an aging population and more single parent household, both contributing to the increasing income inequality. But that is not the changing demographics might be one of the reasons, but that is not the primary reason for increase in inequality. And another reason which is more important and we need to focus on is the declining share of national income captured by labor income. And this, to understand this, we have to understand that how wealth is distributed among different actors in an economy. And labor income, or what we known as wage and salary, make up most of the labor income that is paid to individuals, and this include the implicit value of fringe benefit, right? So it is the payment to workers including wages, salaries, as well as any fringe benefits that you get out of employment. So labor income is one part of the total pie of income that is to be distributed among different economic actors. So, one part is the labor income, the second part is the capital income, which includes the rent, profit, and interest, which generally goes to the company, right. So, the labor income uh, tells us what part of the total pie of economic activities goes to individual who work for wages and salaries, and capital income tells us what part of the total pie goes to corporations as profits, as rents, as interest. And then there is a third term which economists use in a very different way than the normal usage of this term. Um, it's called rent, and it does not refer to the rent for example from housing, but to the payment for the use of any capital asset such as machinery, land, building, on list. So the pie constitute of these three things: labor income, capital income, and rent. And what has happened over the year that the wage share of the income pie has diminished over time. For example, the real wages in the United States only grew by 5% from 1979 to 2006, and that's not the annual growth. The wages are not growing at 5% every year. They grew just 5% in over 37 years, right? Meanwhile, the real GDP per capita in the United States have grew from 80% over the same 37 years. So, in other words, there has been a significant economic growth, but virtually none of it is going to the average workers, and most of it is going to capital income or rent, as economists define it. So, the critical question is why that is happening, and there is there is a lot of research that economists and as well as other social scientists do to understand why that is the case, and there is no universal agreement, but the book gives four prominent explanations that researchers have found for increase in income inequalities in with respect to US and with respect to other developed nations, and these are globalization, technological change, weakening labor unions, and government policies. So, globalization has contributed to growing inequality in United States as well as in developed nation, as competition from low wages countries have driven down wages, and that's what is reflected in the low share of the income pie that goes to wages. And the the second thing is also the weakening of the labor unions that we talked about in chapter 8, I guess, is another factor which leads to greater economic inequalities. And but these are also complemented by government policies which contribute to this inequality, such as tax cut that disproportionately benefits high income household, or reduction in safety net programs that also disproportionately benefits high income households. So these are some of the causes of inequality, especially in developed nations. So inequality is increasing in most developed countries, but the trends are kind of mixed in developing countries, as we saw in the charts above. So there is a lot of debate and discussion among economists focusing on whether increasing economic inequality is inevitable for any developing country, because there is a thesis known as the Kuznets curve hypothesis, which kind of argues that inequality initially increases with economic development, as in because of the fact that if country is developing economically, it is industrializing, and that causes a migration of workers away from agriculture, for example, into cities seeking high paying jobs, and wage remains low in the rural areas, and large urban rural population income gap emerges. So there is a rising inequality during the initial stages of economic development, but eventually this declines with further developments as country becomes more democratic and implements welfare state policies. So people or economists who believe in this hypothesis say would suggest that the rising inequality should be tolerated during the initial stages of development. So for most developing countries, it will be okay to have increasing inequalities, and economic growth in the long run will take care of this inequalities, and it will go down. But as we have seen with respect to developed nation, that is really not the case, and that we need to not to have, and the causes of inequality really depend upon the context of the country, upon the history, upon the policies that have been implemented, as well as international factors such as globalization, which is beyond the control of any country. So this is not really, this hypothesis have no support in empirically. But along with causes of inequality, inequality have consequences, more narrow consequences for individuals as well as broad consequences for societies. So research has established that inequality not only reduces the well-beings of those with low or income or wealth, but it also has implications for life expectancy. It leads to lower life expectancy, it leads to higher infant mortality rates, and it causes greater social problems related to all these health and education consequences. And more broadly excessive inequality also correlates to a weakening democracy, and it also lowers the rate of economic growth in the long run and reduces social cohesion. So, what can be done to address such economic inequality? We don't have really much consensus, but the broad policy approaches to reducing inequalities can be summarized into three kind of approaches. So, to reduce inequality through tax and tax policies, through wage policies, and through public spending and regulatory policies. So, if we think about the tax policies, the it gives you a, according to research, tax system provides many options for reducing inequalities, and one of this is increasing taxes on high income household, or what is known as progressive taxes. And if we think about wage policies, there are suggestions revolving around raising the minimum wages, which can be used to boost the income of low income workers, and that would be helpful in reducing the inequality by raising the income of the people who are at the bottom, percentages. Other proposals for reducing economic inequality focuses on public spending priorities, and one thing that has been addressed in research is reducing educational inequalities is often presumed to lead to reduction in earning inequality, but there are no consensus, and results of such studies are somehow mixed. And other potential ways to use public spending to reduce inequality include funding career skill training, housing assistance, and healthcare, and government policies that provide labor union with more bargaining power have also been suggested, and might be, have been researchers found that such policies might be successful at reducing income inequality. And as we talked about in chapter 8, the declining power of labor union is generally recognized as a factor that has caused inequality to increase in developed countries, and that is why researchers looked at all these public spending policies, wage policies, and tax policies to kind of think of ways to address rising inequality, especially in developed countries like United States. So it is evident that income and wealth in the United States and many other countries are increasingly concentrated, with very few individuals, with high current inequality levels limiting the economic opportunities that are available to many individuals and well-being of almost 80% of the population. So, and research has also found, and this is more evident uh, at this point in time when we are facing global pandemic, but research has also found that policies can be effective at reducing inequalities. This could include more progressive tax structure, putting more of the tax burden on the groups at the top of the income spectrum, increasing minimum wages and improving working conditions of workers, employment, creating investment in infrastructure, and transfer systems that provide a strong safety net for lower income workers. And all these policies have been used in European countries and found to be highly effective in reducing inequalities. And as we saw in the graphs before, European countries have some of the world's lowest disposable income Gini coefficients. So, but in case of United States, we see that transfers are much more limited, with overall tax revenues very low. So, US is kind of moving in the opposite direction as compared to European countries, and this is also points to the very fact that reducing inequality is as much as a political challenge as an economic one, because it requires political will to think about all these policies that can reduce inequality. So, I will end here, and this is an important chapter because it kind of goes at the heart of what we are facing as we deal with a global pandemic today. So, thank you.